Hi everyone, Tony and Petrus here, and we are halfway through the Rogue Festival. And my first two performances went very well, had a nice audience for both, and got some good feedback, some good reviews. So everything's going well, and now that we're at the midpoint of the festival, I thought what I would do in this video is show you just what it takes to set up for these shows. Now in a festival environment, the typical thing is that you have to just set up, roll in, do your thing, and get the hell out. So in order to accomplish that with a complicated rig, the way it works is I have the rolling platforms, all the gear sets up on those rolling platforms where you're ready to go, and as soon as we can roll in, we roll in, and basically we're done. So I'm going to show you the basic process of setting it up. It takes about a half hour to 40 minutes to bring everything in, set it up. Generally, if it's not raining, we set up outside in front of the venue and then we just roll in. On the second show, it was raining, so they gave us a little space in a corner to where we could set up and do what we needed to do. And then it made it pretty easy to roll on stage and roll off stage, as it were. So first thing I'm going to do is bring in the platforms. I'm obviously going to trim this down as we go. You're not going to see every detail. You're just going to see the major parts, so you don't have to sit here for 30 or 40 minutes watching me set stuff up. At any rate, I'll be right back. So if we look at our platform sections, we're in two parts. This has the keyboards and all the sound making equipment. And then this is where I set. So to lock them together, we just use these simple little hasps and roll them up, lock them in. Then we put all the gear on. Now you can see I have some shelf and cleats and things, and as we go through this, you'll see how those mark out what we're going to be doing to place all of the gear on this. So this is the main stand for all the keyboard gear, and as you can see, the shelf and there's a little cleat over there that bump up against this leg, and then the front of the legs just come up right to the leading edge of the platform, and then that lines everything up for the gear that goes underneath. There's my pedal keyboard, my looper, and then my control pedals. So we'll get those next. Now with my three control items underneath the keyboard deck, we have to plug a lot of stuff in. And so the way I've done this is I have this kind of umbilical which carries all the information I need to and from the rack of effects and the amplifier and EQ and all of that. That gets plugged in later. And then I have all of the stuff that plugs into all of this set up so that it's all marked on kind of another umbilical here that we have twisted around a beam here to keep it out of the way for while we're setting stuff up. And all in all, it's fairly simple. It just takes some time. Then we have this little umbilical which comes off of the control pedals here, and this has to go upstairs to be connected into the main keyboard. I'll be showing you that next. And then of course we have this other. This carries the MIDI signal from the pedal keyboard and provides power to the pedal keyboard. And I'll show you a little more of those details in a minute here. Those go back down. So the main keyboard on this setup is my Studio Logic SL88. It is a full-feature MIDI controller. Does not make any sounds on its own. And so it provides me with not only control of sounds that emanate from the computer software, but also sends out various control signals to the various devices. For the effects processors, it also sends control signals to the software on the computer, which we will see in a little bit. That allows me to have everything coordinated, at least as far as what this particular setup is capable of. So basically, I'm playing along, and if I need a change of sound down here, I can hit one button with my foot, and that will not only change the sound setup, but it will also change the effects setup, and allows me to go pretty seamlessly from one thing to the next. So again, we have a lot of stuff to plug in here because this keyboard is doing a lot of stuff. So we have all the control pedals. That's what I've hooked up here. These are the MIDI cables, which send. The blue one is the signal from the pedal keyboard, and that comes to the input. And then we have two outputs, number 1 and number 2. And these go to the effects processors on the side rack. And then of course the ever important power. It has its own power supply in here. Now what I have inside here, I've got the various power supplies, a little plug strip, and they're all kind of stuck down in here so they stay with the stand. And then everything's marked and kind of cinched up into what we need for various situations. The upper keyboard is my C200, we'll see that in a minute, and then this is its power and output signal. And that goes on later. The next thing we do is, now that we've got this keyboard all plugged in and all of its control signals going where they need to go, I do play one song where I am using a backing track, and that's comes off of my old BR600 multi-track recorder. We'll get that next. So when we were coming down to the wire on getting this show together for Rogue Festival, I didn't know if I was going to be able to get a hold of the RC600 looper or not. And I only had that little RC1 looper, which unfortunately doesn't do a lot. So I did set up the show in such a way that I could do it with a combination of the RC1 looper and this multi-track little Porta Studio recording device. 2 weeks ago I did get the RC600, so I didn't have to use as many pre-recorded things, and so that was going to make for a much nicer show. And again, I'll show you a little bit more about the RC600 in a minute. But one song, the one called Obsessive Love, there was just no practical way to set it up in the short period of time I ended up with on the RC600, so I went ahead and just kept this in place for that one piece. So now we've got this all hooked up, and we've got this ready to hook up. Now we just need to bring in the other keyboard. this is the Roland C200, and it is a standalone pipe organ emulator. It's designed to be a pipe organ substitute for accompanying a choir or playing with a Baroque orchestra, something like that. And I'm using this as the second source of sound. This is also the keyboard that was used to make all of the recordings, studio recordings of the music. So now it's time to bring in the effects rack, which all this stuff plugs into. That's next. In my cramped little space here, I'm not going to be able to get the camera in a good position for you to see what's going on here. But basically, these are the other ends of all the cables and cords I plugged in to the keyboards and devices over here. And so all of these are marked to go into particular locations. So we have a couple different mixers, we have 3 different effects processors, we have an equalizer, and we have an amplifier, and that all gets plugged into from here. So now we have our rack set up, we have our keys set up, we have everything underneath set up. Next thing is to set up the computer. Now ideally for a setup like this we'd be using a laptop that was dedicated to do only the tasks that I needed to do. In this case I'm having to drag a desktop computer around because, well, that's what I had. So I wiped that desktop computer off, and then it's only handling the one function for this show. Okay, so now everything, theoretically, if I remembered everything and got everything plugged into where it belongs, everything is hooked up, and the last task is to plug it in and connect up the speakers. So this is the point where the setup, which has been in near the entryway of where I'm performing, is all ready to go. We roll this whole thing in just like this, put it in place, and then we bring in the 2 speakers and plug everything in and then boot it up. So here we have 2 simple speaker lines using what are called banana plugs. And those are pretty handy. We just plug into the back of the amplifier and we take them out to wherever we're going to have our speaker. So for today's demonstration I'll just put them over here. So basically what we have to do is turn the power on, turn all of this gear on, boot up the computer last. Turn the power strip on, then our various on switches. Make sure everything comes up as it should. Got our amplifier. RC600 looper is booting up. Pedal board's on. And again, this is another one of those situations where, you know, a more appropriate piece of equipment would be a laptop computer, because this, the laptop running on batteries could have been booted up and ready to go. What happens here is that I have to get the power all going before this thing has power and doesn't have any battery. But the really important thing is that the last thing that happens is the organ emulation software that is running off of the second keyboard has to go up last, otherwise it won't recognize the second keyboard as being there. And this takes time for it to just do the boot up part, and that can be a little nerve-wracking when you're trying to get a show up and running and you've only got a few minutes. Now, the software I'm launching here is called Hotwork. and it is a pipe organ emulator based on sample playback. And this C200 is kind of the same thing, only it's a self-contained unit. For this setup, it would be better if, now see, here we go, didn't recognize the Studio Logic keyboard. Okay, so after about 5 minutes of shuffling chords around and trying to get the computer to recognize my controller keyboard, software finally came up. Now we can kind of see if it's registering. So got all these little things to do, all these fiddly things to do. Yeah, we are getting some graphic representation there. So we should, at this point, be ready to make a little bit of sound. Now, with the RC600 multi-track looper, most of what I do, I can do on the spot, in real time. With the RC1 looper, I was going to have to do some stuff pre-recorded just because of the way the two different machines work. So, because the RC600 has multiple loop tracks, and because it has other advanced features in terms of how those loops are set up to work, I can go from one thing to the next in a very fluid way. When we're looking at the RC1 looper, I would stack up something in it, and as soon as I press stop, it would erase it, and so I couldn't recall anything. Now, the backing track I use on piece number 2, that should be able to, I should be able to re-record the elements of that backing track and put them into the RC600 looper. I just didn't have time to mess with that after trying to figure everything else out. And so I just went ahead and left that as a backing track that we can use. I'll just play a little bit of that. So this is a thing that I could put into the RC600 and then play on top of it. Wrong pitch. Here we go. And here you get another element come in. And that element again can be put into the RC600 on a different track, and I can control how the various elements of that backing track come in and out, which gives me a lot more flexibility in a live performance where I can control what's happening and, you know, maybe improvise a bit, stretch something out, compress it, that kind of thing. But when you've got a straight up backing track, you gotta play right to it, so it's not as interesting. But that's the nuts and bolts of putting this thing together, getting it rolled on stage. It's a bit cumbersome for a fringe festival environment. Can this be improved? Well, I hope to be able to do that over the next year, a little bit at a time. I think the first thing that I'm going to be doing is the RC600 multi-track looper is also a multi-effects processor, and I'm going to see how much of this stuff here I can just do directly with the RC600, and then maybe eliminate this rack altogether. That might be a handy thing to do. At any rate, the next shows are coming up this Friday at 5:30 and then Saturday at 2 in the afternoon, and I'll give you all the information. Will be in the video description, so if you're in the Fresno area, you can come on down and see me make music live. Thanks for joining me today, and I hope you've enjoyed this, and come on down to the show.